I'm excited for everyone to join us for today's Art at Noon. It's my pleasure to introduce Stacey Swigart for today's lecture, Philadelphia History Through Art, Part 2. Stacey is the director of the Atwater Kent Collection at Drexel University's Lenfest Center for Cultural Partnerships, where she has worked since 2018 on collections management and curatorial tasks related to the former Philadelphia History Museum collection. With experience at institutions like the Valley Forge Historical Society, Please Touch Museum, and Historic Germantown, she has curated everything from George Washington's Breeches to Barbie's Dream House. Her expertise spans exhibition development, museum management, collections policies, and educational program design for diverse audiences. Stacey has also served on various arts and humanities boards, held leadership roles with the American Alliance of Museums Curators Committee, and contributed to AAM's Direct Care Task Force. She holds a BFA in Historic Preservation from SCAD, an MA in Museum Studies from the University of Leicester, and a nonprofit management executive certificate from Georgetown University. As a reminder, PAFA's exhibition Philadelphia Revealed is on view until April 6th. And I also want to highlight the Art at Noon lectures is generously supported by the Barron family in memory of Rose Susan Hirshhorn Barron, a former docent at the Academy and a great supporter of its education programs. And I'll hand it off to Stacey.
Thanks so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And hold on one second. There we go. Well, we'll start a little bit with what I had last time. For those of you that did not get to see the last one, I want to share the brief timeline of the Atwater Kent Collection. That the Atwater Kent Museum was founded in 1938, opened to the public in 1941. Eventually, lots of stuff happened in between there. There was closures, there was openings, there was closures, there was openings. In 2009, there was a major renovation, and it was renamed the Philadelphia History Museum at the Atwater Kent in 2010, reopened again in 2012. Unfortunately, due to lack of funding and other issues, in 2018, the History Museum permanently closed its doors. By 2019, the city was talking to Drexel about potentially transferring the collection, which it was working on. And also at the same time, Drexel was contracted to evaluate and inventory the entire collection. In 2022, Drexel became the steward of the collection, and there's still legal issues pending, but we're getting closer. And in 2023, we launched the online collection. So we have a portal, and we also had Seeing Philadelphia, our first exhibit that we had at PAFA for the summer. And then in 2024, we completed the evaluation of the collection and also at the same time opened Philadelphia Revealed. I didn't update the slide here to show that the exhibit is open until April 6th, which Leah just mentioned. There's 130,000 plus items in the collection, and objects range from 3-dimensional to 2-dimensional. I like to say that there's everything, including the kitchen sink. The kitchen sink happens to be a little miniature one, but we do have one. And we have everything from business and retail and shipping and city materials and all these things that you can see samples of in the Philadelphia Revealed exhibit. Over 650 objects are on display. And here's sort of our opening and the layout that we have for the exhibit. So I hope that you get to see it if you haven't already. I know we've had a variety of people tell us they've come back multiple times. Since there is so much to see, there's a lot to see and a lot to learn. There's 9 sections that we have in the exhibit, and this is from our museum or exhibit catalog that we had created for Philadelphia Revealed. And the breakdown has all sorts of things from the inception of the museum, the fact that there's a collection of collections, so many different museums that closed, or collections that places were wanting to get rid of ended up giving them to the former Atwater Kent Museum and Philadelphia History Museum. And then celebrations related to the city and nation. Philadelphia being a city of first. Of course, you can't not have an exhibit without sports. Salvaged and treasures that were found on street corners. The manufacturing hub that Philadelphia was and is, and then department stores and retail, and then the creativity that you can find within the city of Philadelphia. I'm going to start with a really cool painting. We have several paintings by William Winter. He was a genre painter, did a lot of portraits as well. He was born in Philadelphia. And he lived most of his life in the city with a brief stint in Charleston, South Carolina. He became a member of PAFA in 1860, and he exhibited portraits at PAFA and the Artist Fund Society as early as 1836. This one is called The Pie Man, or a Civic Procession, dated to 1856. And the Civic Procession was most likely related to the U.S. Agricultural Society Fair that was held in 1856. It was their 4th annual exhibition in the U.S., and it featured a parade led by city officials, tradesmen, volunteer firemen, and the military on Chestnut Street outside the old City Hall. So this is a view from 5th and Chestnut. And I'm going to point out some details here. The Pie Man, again, you can see William Winter's style with the portraits. There's that interesting character behind him with some sort of scarf covering his chin. And if you look really, really closely, you can see some of the signage or postings on the edge of the building. And one of them mentions the Walnut Street Theater and something else related to votes and elections. Here we have some details of some kids that were eating some of the pies off the pieman's tray. I love this painting or portion of the painting of the horse and the guy on the horse, and you can see the fireworks exploding at the feet, and both the scared look on the horse and the gentleman on the horse is really interesting. And then some other details there again, the little boys with the pies and the portrait of the guy on the horse. Our second painting that's featured in Philadelphia Revealed is Crazy Nora, sometimes spelled Nora with the H, sometimes without, in different kinds of publications. The woman behind the portrait is Honora Powers, who was quite a character in the city of Philadelphia. She was an Irish immigrant who came in the 1820s, we believe. And after the religious Catholic riots of 1822, it was said that she had, quote, lost her reason. So we know that she suffered with mental illness. We don't know the exact circumstances of her background, but and everything that happened to her. And I'm sure she probably lived a fairly sad life. As you can imagine, being she was homeless part of the time, Sometimes she lived at the Friends Asylum for a number of years. She worked as a domestic at some points. She was known for her clothing, her men's top hat. She was very tall, and she worked sometimes as a strong arm. So she would have a boot jack and would go around and try to collect debts from people. In part of her uh, work around the city, she was well known by residents everywhere. I'm going to share something from, gotta lift up my notebook here. The New York Times, they actually published an obituary for her on February 26, 1865. She was around 67 when she passed away. But this is in part what the obituary read in New York Times. Death of a celebrated character in Philadelphia. On Wednesday last, another and more celebrated one passed from earth after a singularly eventful and fitful career of nearly half a century. We allude to Crazy Nora, whose strange street antics, fantastic dress, tall figure, and peculiar yet interesting expressions of countenance has made her name a sort of household word for many years past throughout the length and breadth of the city. I mentioned she wore men's clothing, men's hat, known for that great coat, um, and yelling. She was known also for yelling along the streets of the city. Her portrait here is at the corner of 9th and Chestnut Street near the Girard House Hotel. And I'm going to show a picture here. A little bit of a detail of sort of this porch extension off the Girard House Hotel. And here's a photograph of the Girard House Hotel. And you can see that bump out in the front there past the sign that says the Broadway Oyster House. So we know that was the location she was standing at. Interestingly enough, in our collection, we have a menu from the Girard House Hotel. So this is a nice piece of ephemera to go with the painting. And of course, this is not on display in the exhibit, but I did want to share because it is really interesting. They have a prefix menu here from 1892 with the wine list and a list on the back of the menu with the hours for meals. I found it really interesting that there's a nurses and children's pricing. The next artist I want to talk about is James Stidham. I've jumped a little bit ahead. This is Portrait of Stephen Smith. But James, not a lot of information is known about him as an artist. He worked under several names, and there was some conjecture about who actually did the portraits that we have of Stephen, and you'll see in a little bit his wife Harriet. He was a Black artist who attended PAFA in the 1880s around the same time as Henry Tanner. He was a descendant of New Sweden colonist Timon Stidham. That his name was spelled Stidem, with connections, believe it or not, to the Hazelius family. And we have some Hazelius paintings, including a self-portrait of Gustavus Hazelius, as well as his wife, on display in the exhibit. I'm not featuring those here, but it's neat that those connections exist. Hazelius is the artist who painted the two Native American portraits of Tishkahan and Lapawenza, which are currently on loan to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Stephen and Harriet Lee Smith were from Pennsylvania. Stephen Smith was born in Dauphin County, enslaved, he was able to eventually buy his freedom. And I understand he bought it around 1818 for $50, which the equivalent in 2024 would be a little over $1,000. He became a businessman, a preacher, philanthropist, abolitionist, real estate developer. He was involved in the Underground Railroad and helped found the Stephen Smith Home for the Aged, which was located. We have an engraving in the collection. Again, not in the exhibit, but sharing this here so you can see it. It was on Poplar Street in the Winfield neighborhood section of the city. Harriet Smith was born in 1797, actually on Christmas Day, and she ran an oyster and restaurant house and was active also in abolition and everything that her husband was involved in as well. They married around 1818 as well when Stephen had purchased his freedom, and they became a wealthy Black, and I'm going to call them a power couple. Um, they contributed to a whole ton of charitable causes, particularly the abolition movement, and a lot of their money went to that. So they were well known for that, and one of the wealthiest couples in the United States at the time. Interestingly, when they passed, they're both buried in Eden Cemetery, which is in Collingdale, Pennsylvania, and it is the oldest existing Black-owned cemetery in the United States. It's well worth a visit. There's a lot of people there. I'm going to jump here to 1876 and the Centennial Exhibition. And the first item I want to show that's on display is the Centennial Streetcar painting by Edwin Haley. He's also an artist that we don't know a whole ton about. He was a sign painter and actually worked for the railroad service and did a lot for different streetcar signs and so forth. This was actually published in Frank Leslie's Historical Register in 1876 and has been used subsequently. I find it really interesting because it's all filled with men. And if you look really closely in the back of the streetcar, right at the edge here on the left, you can see one woman sitting in the streetcar. You wonder where they all are, but while this is a bit of a caricature in a way, comic painting with all these people, it does say there was over 10 million people that went to the city. So they tried to find their way any way they could to get to West Philadelphia in Fairmount Park to see the actual fairgrounds of the Centennial. There was multiple modes of transportation. So not only the streetcar, which these poor horses look so sad, dragging all these people, but you would go by horseback. You could walk if you really wanted to by wagon. I know Philadelphians were entrepreneurial and got people there themselves. Think of it as the early Uber. There was two train stations, the Pennsylvania Railroad right outside the fairgrounds and the Pennsylvania and Reading Railroad, also outside the fairgrounds, but closer to the river. You could also go by boat. And again, over 10 million people at the fairgrounds for the 6 months of the centennial. Another thing that's on display is what was the largest photograph in the world at the time. I don't have an overall shot, believe it or not. We didn't take that, so we need to get on that image of the fairgrounds. So it's taken from George's Hill area. You can just see the edge kind of in the foggy mist of the light exposure actually of the photograph of a very large viewing tower that you could see the edge of the fairgrounds. So it's kind of over where the Mann Music Center would be. That kind of view is where it's located. The buildings in the foreground are most of the states that participated. And then you can just see like the edge of Agricultural Hall and part of the dome of Memorial Hall in the top portion. But the painting itself, excuse me, the photograph itself, over 10 feet long, was stitched together, and I'm saying stitch because it carefully had to be put together and then kind of lightened so that you didn't see the lines of the images. Um, what's interesting is it was taken from scaffolding on the hill that was erected specifically for the photograph, and the large sheet of albumin paper that they used was supplied by John H. Clemens' factory on Sansom Street. Um, Fun fact is that the whites of 125 dozen eggs were required to coat the paper to get the consistency that they wanted. It was done by Frederick Gudekunst, who was a very popular photographer in the 19th century here in Philadelphia. He opened his first photo studio with his brother in 1854 and operated his business for 60 years. He grew to prominence in the Civil War, kind of like you might have heard of Matthew Brady. Frederick Gudekunst was a similar photographer, popular for his portraits, including many dignitaries and a lot of celebrities in the 19th century. And he had locations at various times on Arch Street, Girard Avenue, and Broad Street. Um, when he passed, he was eventually buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery. Another centennial figure um, is Montague Abrahams. This is a silhouette that came into our collection fairly recently, of a little girl, Mary Madison McGuire, who was 8 years old. It's written on the back. I didn't show the back here, but the language is that it was taken by Montague Abrams at 919 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. It's fantastic because A, it's a child, which most of the silhouette portraits you see are either always usually adults, but she's also holding a cat, and I can't imagine that she was carrying the cat to the fair, but he did have studio space downtown, as well as space that he used in at the fairgrounds, specifically in Memorial Hall. And he was an artist that used scissors to create the silhouettes. So he didn't use a machine, he didn't use sketching, he solely used the paper and cut it out by hand while looking at the portrait subject. This is the back of a different silhouette that we have by Montague Abrams. And he was still touting his centennial silhouette likenesses as of even 1878 and 1879. This is the back of one that you can see. It's handwritten on the back in pencil with March 1878, and an early item that came into the former Atwater Kent Museum collection. His address at the time was 806 Chestnut Street, as opposed to the later date during the centennial, or the earlier date, I should say. James Queen, a Philadelphia-born artist. He was a lithographer and chromolithographer. He started an apprenticeship at age 14 with Duval. He did a lot of detailed print work, honing his craft over the years with under Duval as a teenager and then into adulthood, and then eventually entered into the Pennsylvania militia and was part of the Civil War. And he worked in the military there in 1862, 1863, created artwork related to his service in the Civil War, as well as fundraising by creating a number of works for the Sanitary Fair of 1864. He was also a member of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows and the Wecaco Engine Company, which was a fire company in Philadelphia. I'm going to show a few different things from him. Not everything is part of the exhibit, but I want to put him in context here. Here's an image of him, James Fuller, Queen. This is an image from the Library Company of Philadelphia. Unfortunately, we don't have one in our collection. This is a membership certificate to the Wekaco Fire Company, and the artwork was done by James Queen. You can see it's very detailed, lots of uh, gilding, and colorization on this is really nice. This came from the former Signa collection. Another piece that we do have on display, but not in the art section, we have an area related to Long's Museum, which was a 19th century hotel and kind of restaurant, entertainment venue, museum. James William Long collected a whole variety of stuff. And with Long being a businessman who created works of art on paper and his different kinds of engraving. This is a lithograph on stone. So this is very thick and heavy stone, and it's a business envelope of William Long. And this again is on display. And I want to show the image. There's a close-up of that engraving with all those men that's featured on the envelope. And then something that you can't see because we only show the front of the envelope. This is the back of the envelope. And William Long used this great rebus at the top of it. Not really great for advertising because you really have to look at it and figure out what it spells. But it shows the refectory and museum hotel. I love all the fonts and the frilly furbelows that you can see in there. William Long was also known for his cigar making, and the selling of all this different unique stuff, and food stuff like liquor and oysters. You could play billiards and do bowling and shuffleboard and all sorts of stuff. Um, this is the back of the watercolor that we have on display in Philadelphia Revealed. And I wanted to show that because it's signed and written by James Queen. And it says Rope Ferry Schuylkill, from Nature, J. Queen, 1856. And then let me flip over. And so this is the image that we have on display in the exhibit. So this is the Rope Ferry Bridge. And it has its own interesting history. It's the Penrose Rope Ferry Bridge on the Schuylkill River is the official title. The Rope Ferry Bridge was established in 1742 and listed as kept by Samuel Penrose in 1776. The ropes were rigged from shore to shore, and you can kind of get the sense of that with the different poles there. I love the detail that you can see, including the two gentlemen in the lower boat having a drink, and then the animals that you can see in the foreground here, including the horse, and then the dog laying on the ground. I'll mention with James Queen, something related to Philadelphia history is that we were able to, you can track where he lived in all the different places during his career. And so he had many different residences. And so he was born in Southwark and lived a lot of his life at 489 South 2nd Street. And some other places I'll mention too, so you get a sense of his kind of moving around, and not necessarily moving around from neighborhood to neighborhood. He was at 409 South 2nd Street. He was at 533 Queen Street. He was at 812 Wharton Street and 724 Pine Street. Sadly, he died from multiple sclerosis in 1886. Thomas Birch. He was the son of William Birch. You might recognize both the Birches, William and Thomas, worked on the Birch views of Philadelphia. And they're the ones that document the city of Philadelphia, the architecture, the scenes, city life in the early 19th century. Um, they immigrated from England in 1794. He painted a variety of landscapes, portraits, and marine paintings, particularly naval battles of the War of 1812. He exhibited regularly at PAFA for 40 years, starting in 1811, and managed the museum from 1812 to 1817. The image that we have in the collection and on display in Philadelphia Revealed is the Upper Ferry Bridge from the east bank of the Schuylkill River. Um, it's depicting the single span bridge across the Schuylkill at Spring Garden Street. It was completed in January of 1813 and was 366 feet long, believed to be the longest single span bridge in the world at the time. And unfortunately, it was destroyed by fire on September 1st in 1838. Let me see. The view itself is fairly simple. And I will say it was reproduced on blue and white Staffordshire by Joseph Stubbs. And Stubbs' image was probably um, done from a copy by an engraver named Jacob Bloucher. I've not heard of Jacob Bloucher before, but his engraving was used for what Stubbs created on the Staffordshire. And there's all sorts of varieties of this. So this is a fairly large platter that we have in the collection. There's plates and bowls. I don't know that you could get a whole entire dining service related to this theme, but so many of similar style birch views were used for some of the Staffordshire patterns that were made. Um, Not on display. There's a bonus image that I'm going to leave you with here. Um, and that is one of Birch's marine paintings that he was really famous for, besides his landscapes and cityscapes and so forth. And it's called the United States and the Macedonian, which is this painting right here. It depicts the naval engagement between the United States frigate, which is on the right here, with Captain Stephen Decatur, and the British frigate, the Macedonian. And this battle took place near the island of Madeira. What's interesting is Thomas Birch listed himself as having a painting on display um, and exhibited at PAFA. And the title at the time that he had listed was Engagement Between the Frigate United States and Macedonian in 1813. And it's entirely possible that it is this one. And I realized that I've spoken very fast and got through my list of images. So I want to open it up to any kind of questions.
Stacey, I see that there's one question that was in the chat, and it was when you were talking about the Long Museum and Hotel. And Allison Winekrantz asked, where was Long's in Philadelphia?
Um, you know what? That's a good question. Let me stop sharing. And you know what? I don't have its address in front of me. I want to say it was like 3rd or 4th Street, I believe.
I
I
think
don't have an address.
I saw South Third Street on the advertisement.
Okay, yes,
That,
yes,
that narrows it down a little bit at least.
that totally jives with what I remember. Yes. But he was totally a character, and William Long, I should say, was totally a character and had his finger in every single pie that you could think of. And I would imagine that it would have been kind of like a Ripley's Believe It or Not, with all the stuff that he collected over time and had on display. Kind of, I don't want to call it a freak show in some ways, but it sort of seems like that with all this stuff. And then on display in the exhibit, we have this great list of some of the items that he ended up selling. And what's interesting is part of the history of the collection, and how a lot of long material came into the Atwater Kent Museum was very early. It was in the 40s, and evidently there was a gentleman whose name was McCorkle, who uh, there's notes between the Francis daughter of William Long and McCorkle, and she kind of poo-pooed McCorkle's association, but he had a lot of stuff in his basement related to the stuff that Long had. And so a lot of those items were then sold to the Atwater Kent Museum. And so much of it related to business and the arts and history of the city of Philadelphia. So he was a little bit forward-thinking in all that collecting, but it was a lot of stuff.
That's really fascinating. It sounds reminiscent of Barnum's as well in New York and how
Yes, yes.
they're collecting these kind of oddities. I see a question from PAFA's very own Leah Triplet. Stacey, what's your favorite object in the Atwater Kent collection on view in Philadelphia, revealed or not?
Hmm. Um, it's hard to say because there's so many sort of little favorites that I have. We have this great well, I have to say I've studied a lot and did a lot of research on the Centennial, in part because of my time at Please Touch Museum and Memorial Hall, and I really do love that panoramic and to know and to see all those buildings there, to see some of the people in that photograph, to know it took 125 dozen eggs as part of that giant piece of paper, and how it was produced and so forth, the history behind that, and even the photographer, Frederick Goodekunst, has a great history. So there's so many facets to just that one object that I love that connect so many things related to Philadelphia history. But I also have to say, growing up, my favorite Philly was Mike Schmidt, and we have his uniform on display. And if I could pick a more contemporary piece, knowing that uniform is on display is really cool. I played softball, and my number was 20 because Mike Schmidt was number 20.
That's great. Thank you. Another question I see in the chat from Denise. Do we know what were the buildings seen in Birch's view of the bridge over the Schuylkill River?
Um, so it's Fairmount area, and it would have been um let me look at my notes here. Chestnut Street. I don't know if we specifically have the names of what those buildings were located, but we could probably figure that out.
And another question is from Hillary in the chat. I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about the future for displaying the collection. Will it be possible to see some of the collection after this exhibition closes?
Yeah, so while we don't have anything on the books for like another Philadelphia Revealed exhibit, our intention is moving forward, the whole idea of Museum Without Walls, where you can go online and look at the collection. We're documenting everything. Now it's a slow process. There's over 130,000 objects in the collection. So we just crossed the threshold of 13,000. So 10% is now online, which is fantastic. And what's going to be happening is we'll be opening our loan program officially sometime later this year. We're kind of doing a soft launch, which you can read about on our webpage. But we're opening up for loans for different institutions in the Philadelphia area and beyond to borrow objects. And we'll document where things are and how you can see them. Different institutions are doing exhibits. And of course, with the sesquicentennial, semi-quincentennial coming up, we know that there's going to be a lot of stuff asked for different kinds of exhibits. And then we're also doing a series of community-related exhibits. And so we're going to sort of deploy a number of cases and objects to different organizations around the city during the next year and a half, 2025, 2026, to display some of these materials. So objects related to what we have in Philadelphia Revealed may be on display again. And then other things that currently aren't on display that people are asking for will go on exhibit. So there's a variety of different things in the works so that more objects will be seen outside the walls of storage.
That's wonderful to hear. And I see a few more questions, one from Ingrid. Ingrid's curious about her favorite object in the show, the grappling hook. Can you say a little bit about how that came to be in the collection?
Yeah, so that was something that was confiscated. I don't think it was ever actually used. I think it was um, caught before it ever was deployed by a prisoner at Holmesburg prison. And so when the prison was being shut down, this is what I understand, the former curator and registrar were contacted of the former Atwater Kent Museum, and they were able to go and collected a variety of items that had been confiscated from different prisoners. And so while we don't necessarily know who it came from and who made it, there's a variety of materials, including the grappling hook, which I will say, I can't imagine how they made it. It had to have been done from a bed. It's very heavy, and the grappling hook points are quite sharp. So you can see it's wrapped with cloth because you could cut yourself on this thing. You could seriously injure yourself on this thing. And so you know it was made very strong for them to try to even think about attempting to use that sucker to get out of prison. So it's interesting. There are some notes related to some of the objects. I don't recall anything like where they found the grappling hook, but sometimes there's notes that somebody might have put on some of those items that were confiscated. Like this was found under the heating vent when they did a search or stuff like that. So that grappling hook is sure an interesting piece.
It's fascinating about the curators and registrar getting to select these objects.
Yes.
Another question I see is, do we know where the rope ferry crossing was that we saw in the watercolor?
Um, yes. So it's close to Chestnut Street, I believe. Um, let me double check. Um, yeah, I want to say, well, don't quote me on that one. I don't have the actual location. Fairmount area, yes. Something that we can look up and I can certainly add to the record so that we can see that later on online. It is currently online, but we're adding information as we learn it. So um, we'll continue to do that.
That's great, because too, I know the landscape has changed so drastically in the city. So I think our
Yes.
understanding, or how do we figure and determine landmarks now?
And internally, we've talked about using the historic images and taking contemporary images from that, try to find that view and see what it looks like now as opposed to what it looked like then.
That's great to hear. I have a kind of art related question as well. I'm curious about how some of the artwork came into Atwater Kent's collection. Thinking of the Histelius, were some artists donating items that passed down their family? Were they perhaps saved relics in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so this is interesting because the Atwater Kent is a collection of collections. A variety of stuff came in directly to the Atwater Kent Museum, sometimes directly right from the artist, sometimes from family members. So, for example, some of the David Bustle Bowser materials. He's the African American artist who did the portrait of John Brown and some of the fire equipment and parade material. Um, some of those came directly from descendants, and then some came via the three-dimensional deaccession of the collection from the former Historical Society of Pennsylvania, who had a very large art collection, gave that to the Atwater Kent Museum. And so those mostly, there were some purchases by the former, but by the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. A lot of gifts and donations were made. Bequests also came in. And so you can imagine there's a whole variety of ways that these different things came in. I want to say we have over 1,200 paintings in the collection with a variety of access points, whether it came from purchases or gifts to the Atwater Kent Museum or other organizations that ended up closing and giving them to Atwater Kent, or the Historical Society of Pennsylvania collection.
One of my favorite objects is the Rembrandt Peale life-size painting. So I find these kind of afterlives of some of these objects so fascinating in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and they're interesting because they came directly to the Atwater Kent Museum, not anybody else. And it was like nobody seemed to want them necessarily. And it was Atwater Kent who said, well, the Atwater Kent Museum said, we want to have these. And they're fantastic in part because they were painted on the doors of the museum. So you can really see their history, not only for the painting aspect of it, but the historical aspect of the actual architecture of the building.
I don't see any additional questions right now in the chat or Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and thank you so much, Stacey, for a fantastic lecture. And it was fascinating to hear some of the objects that were highlighted and kind of the range of themes as well. And as a reminder, Philadelphia Revealed is on view at PAFA until April 6th. I hope everyone can come back to see the exhibition or see it for the first time.
Thank you.